Who chooses a skull for a symbol? What crazy person is this? Does he want to scare? Is he an evil guy? Is he addicted to Halloween? Today, I'm going to tell you the spiritual reasons why I have chosen a skull, a psychedelic skull, to be my symbol. I'm Cavalher. As a person, I'm a spiritualist. As a professional, I'm a consciousness designer, a mind hacker. These roles have a common goal: create and develop consciousness. My consciousness, your consciousness. The skull is a symbol of consciousness development. But why? Consciousness development is a process of growth, of transformation. In that process, we recognize and leave behind psychological limitations in order to discover and develop our potentials, as well as become larger, better, and more capable. Without these psychological limitations, you become more authentic towards yourself. You become who you really are. However, in order to become who you really are, you need to quit being who you are today. Everybody loves the ideas of leaving behind the limitations, self-transformation, and developing consciousness. However, when the time to effectively leave limitations behind comes, no one wants to drop the bomb. We realize that we are stuck only after the transformation has happened. Before the transformation, we are attached to our limitations because we see them as personality traits that define us. That's why leaving limitations behind causes pain. If such limitations are deeply rooted, removing them will feel like you are being torn apart. You are indeed. Don't worry, the skull remains. I have a deep reverence for Christ. Jungian psychology by Carl Jung teaches that Christ's life symbolizes the consciousness development process. Christ's life was a process of progressive love union with God. Consciousness development is a process of progressive love union with your soul that Jung calls the self. Through this process of union, Christ became one with God. He preferred that God's will be done, not his, even when extremely difficult situations came by. In the same way, developing consciousness is to find out what is your soul's will, the self's will, your true self's will, and making it happen. Instead of following your own will, Christ followed this path to the very end, including all the good and bad moments. At the end, he was crucified on the mountain called Calvary. Calvary comes from the Latin word for skull. When we follow the path of consciousness development, we lose all the parts of ourselves that prevented us from seeing who we really are deep down, who we are in our bones. The skull. No matter how many of our parts we leave behind, the skull, our truest and deepest self, is never ever lost. At the precise moment when we are at the top of the mountain, at the top of ourselves, at our skull, we are in contact with the transcendence. We look around and we see all directions. At this precise moment, we see the truth. Right and wrong cease to exist. Limitations fall apart. Every direction is legitimate. All the colors are legitimate. The psychedelic skull has all the colors. Everything is allowed. But Christ's story does not end at the skull. The skull is also a beginning. Christ resurrects. The moment between Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection is of unsurmountable importance for me, for my life. Christ's crucifixion is the symbol of the moment when the ego has totally surrendered to the soul's will. The moment when we are in total harmony with the transcendental. This is the peak of the process Carl Jung describes in his Jungian psychology, the definitive encounter with the self. At this precise point, my creation starts. At this precise point, the paradigm of sense starts. From this point on, Cavalher is speaking. Christ's resurrection in the body and the arrival of the Holy Spirit are the beginning of a new psychological paradigm, a new development stage, a fifth dimensional stage. Christ's resurrection is a moment of happiness. On this very moment, the skull reveals its most heavenly meaning. The skull is the symbol of those who are free. We realize that the attachments we had are not that important. We realize that we do not need to be attached to our personality traits, to our egos, fearing to lose our coherence, our character, our authenticity. Our characteristics don't need to limit ourselves. We can transform ourselves. We realize that the stories we lived in our past are not that important. We don't need to be determined by our past forever. We can live other stories. We can live another life. Starting now, we realize that our pains are not that important. They are the treasure of our story. But we don't need to be stuck there. We don't need to forever use pain to justify our lack of success and unhappiness. We can learn to stand success. We can learn to have the courage to be happy. With the skull, we learn that everything is relative, everything must pass, and everything transforms itself. We learn that everything that we fiercely stood for, as if those things were right, as if those things were everlasting, is also relative, also stays behind, also transforms itself. Therefore, we don't take ourselves too seriously anymore. We realize that our convictions about ourselves and about life were ridiculous. We learn to laugh at ourselves. Those who are truly wise laugh at themselves. Those who are truly wise have no convictions at all. Those who are truly wise are free, free to access all and every realities imaginable. The skull is psychedelic. Tibetan Buddhism is very clear about that. Dakini, the feminine deity that symbolizes the plenitude of consciousness, lives in a palace entirely made of skulls. Dakini laughs out loud. Human beings who are free wear necklaces made out of laughing skulls.